Good morning, Year 4. Welcome to Wednesday's English lesson. I'm going to share my screen with you now. So this week we're going to be writing about volcanoes. On Monday, if you remember, in our first lesson we explored the vocabulary of volcanoes. And yesterday we described a volcanic eruption that was happening in a picture. Today we're going to be writing a short story about a volcanic eruption. Before we do, go back over yesterday's work to remind yourself what you wrote yesterday, because you might want to borrow some of those sentences that you like best to put into your writing today. Okay, can I ask you to pause the video now and to write today's date, Wednesday the 10th of February, and the learning objective, which is to write a short story about a volcano. Well done. Okay, now before we get started today, we've got a little starter. We have a sentence which is sick and needs help to get better. Can you help? So what I'd like you to do is read this sentence and I'd like you to improve it. Perhaps you could make it into a complex sentence, because at the moment we've just got two simple sentences. Maybe you could add detail and make a compound sentence. Maybe you could add in some adjectives to describe the nouns. Or maybe you could improve some of the verbs in the sentences. Okay, pause the video and have a go at that now. Let's have a look at what I wrote and compare it to what you did. I'm sure you've done a great job. I can't wait to see your sentences later on. I wrote this. Hot molten lava spilled over the ground as ferocious forked lightning exploded in the midnight sky. I think that's a bit better than the simple sentences before. Lava went over the ground, there was lightning in the sky. Yeah, that's much more Year 4 ready. Right, let's start today. So this week we've been writing about volcanoes, and we've been building up to this moment where you write your own short story. A short story is only going to be a couple of paragraphs long. We've been inspired by this picture here and by David Attenborough's film, The Perfect Planet. I'm going to read you in a minute the start of this story, but you'll notice I've put ... That means I'd like you to carry on the story and to continue writing, which means you can borrow this starter, or if you wanted to, you could slightly change it, or if you want to completely scrap it and write your own, you can do that too. It was the moment they had been dreading for decades. The volcano had finally erupted. The earth shook as torrents of golden death cascaded over the helpless landscape. Clouds of ash swarmed over the countryside, enveloping everything in their path. Chaos reigned as the beast that had been sleeping for years woke up. Let's just have a quick look at the detail in this little bit of writing. Now remember, yesterday you wrote some noun phrases and you used some precise verbs. So let's find some noun phrases here. I've got here this noun phrase, golden death. This is interesting. Instead of using the word lava, I've described it as golden death. And the landscape here, all this bit down here, the mountains, the trees, the ground, I've called it helpless landscape. Let's look at some of the verbs I've used. We've obviously got the word erupted. That's one of our key words this week, isn't it? But I've also used this word. I've got the verb shook, cascaded, swarmed, enveloping, rained. Lots of lovely, precise verbs. Notice how I've written it in the past tense. It was the moment they had been dreading for decades. The volcano had finally erupted. The earth shook. It cascaded, swarmed, rained, enveloping everything in its path. So carefully check the tense you're going to write in today. Okay, let's carry on. Now, in your story today, this is what I'd like you to include, the content I'd like you to include. I'd like you to describe what happens when the volcano erupts. Think about the magma, the lava, the ash, the lightning. Describe the sounds, the sights, the smells as the eruption happens. Describe what onlookers might feel and be thinking as they watch on helpless. That's right, some people do live in the shadow of volcanoes. How scary it must be to live under an active volcano. Even a dormant volcano that's been sleeping for ages that might erupt. I think people might be terrified if they saw it actually start to rumble, to shake and to wake up. Now, your challenge that some of you would like to do today, I'm sure, is to include some personification. Remember, we talked about that yesterday. Personification is when you give an inanimate object, like the volcano, human characteristics. Remember how we talked yesterday about spitting? That's a human characteristic. But a volcano can spit out lava and ash and smoke. So, pause the video here and just read through this again so you know what you need to include today. Okay, let's just think about some of the keywords, the grammar features, and the purpose of our writing today before we get started. Now remember, this is a short story, so your purpose is to entertain myself and Miss Pearce. In your writing, I know I'm going to see some noun phrases. You also might have some prepositional phrases, which we've mentioned before, and also complex sentences and fronted adverbials. Because your work always needs to be Year 4 ready, you'll have included the basics, capital letters, and the correct punctuation in the correct place. And it's a short story, so you might want to write in 2 or 3 paragraphs. Now let's think today about the words we definitely want to get into our writing today. These are our keywords that we found at the start of the week. And you might want to mention some of these in your writing today. Make sure you spell them correctly. Also, you're going to be using lots of those lovely precise verbs that you collected in yesterday's lesson. Remember to go back and look at those before you start writing to remind yourselves what you might want to include. And some of you will be taking up the challenge today of using personification in your writing. Okay, so it's now time to start writing the rest of your story. Before you do, perhaps you actually would like to be inspired by a real-life volcanic eruption. For example, in AD 79, Mount Vesuvius in Italy exploded, completely destroying the town of Pompeii. In fact, all that's left of Pompeii now is a ruined city. Perhaps you could go and research a little bit about that before you start writing your story. Perhaps you could write it from the point of view, your story, of somebody who lived in Pompeii and who was watching this great monster of a volcano explode and worrying about what would happen to them. Let's pause the video now and start writing your short story. I've started you off with a little sentence starter that you might want to use. You don't have to. And that's in the distance. ... Okay, I can't wait to read your stories today. When you have completed them, I'd like to check them through. Don't forget, pop your fingers in your ears, read them out loud, check they make sense, perhaps read them to your grown-up. Be ready to share them maybe later on this afternoon in our classroom Zoom. But don't forget, please post them on Dojo for this afternoon.